Welcome back to the Reboot Era, the show where we turn setbacks into smaller comebacks. I'm your host, Dre Jankowski. Before we kick off today's episode, I wanted to share something that really worked for me. I've been using jobhire.ai in my own job search, and within a couple of weeks, I had 5 interviews lined up and 2 offers on the table. I may have even accepted one of those offers, but more on that later. What I love is that they're so confident in the process that if you don't land an interview in 15 days, you get your money back. And throughout September 2025, I've partnered with them to give you 30% off with my code DRAY30, DRAY30. So if you're in the middle of your own reboot, this is worth checking out. Today, we're unpacking the emotional side of a layoff with Steve Jaffe, author of The Layoff Journey. Steve is a 25-year marketing and advertising leader who's been laid off 4 times. And he built a practical framework with short exercises for navigating grief, rebuilding community, and finding renewal after job loss. We'll hit the myth of meritocracy, why isolation sneaks in, how to shorten the distance from dismissal to discovery, and what to do this week to steady your mindset. Let's reboot how we process layoffs so you can write the next chapter on your terms.
It's Steve Jaffe, author of The Layoff Journey. Very happy to be here. Marketing, advertising background, 25 years, laid off 4 times, wrote a book about my experience, and I'm looking forward to sharing the lessons I learned across 4 layoffs with your audience today.
Thanks, Steve, for joining the podcast. And I'm excited to have you here, largely because this is actually the second book that I've gotten to read around layoffs. And the first one, it was a little bit more personal. It was a little bit more about like, this is my story. And your book was more of a framework, and I loved what I'll say is before we dive into it, there was these little sections that you included about like an activity. Try this activity, you gave a few lines, and you could fill it out. And I will say I interacted with the book. I thought it was great. But what inspired you? Why write a book about layoffs?
Yeah. Well, let me set the stage for you. It's a journey. Spring 2001. I was working at an ad agency in San Francisco. I had recently been married and I was doing quite well. It was a great agency, great client. And unexpectedly one day I was called into a conference room and in very short order told the client is cutting their budget and we're cutting staff. And thank you very much. You have 5 minutes to clean out your desk. And that experience really was difficult on me. It was, I would say, traumatic, and it took me a long time to recover. Fast forward, it's summer 2023, and I'm experiencing my 4th layoff, and I sail right through it. It's like water off a duck's back. And I look at that, and I wonder to myself, why is this so much different? What has happened? And I realized that I had learned a set of skills to manage and cope with being laid off, and I had found that there was about 20% of the company that was also laid off with me in summer of 2023. And I wanted to share that knowledge and experience that I had gained with those former coworkers. And I wanted to tell them, look, it's going to be okay. Here's what you can expect. Here's how to navigate it. You're going to come out the other side, and it's going to be just a chapter in your story. It's isn't going to be the whole book. And it was then that I realized, you know what, this is something that can help a lot more people than just the people I was laid off with. And that became the premise for the book. And now here we are 2 years after that. And I'm finding that it's a bit bittersweet. You know, there's a very large audience for the book because layoffs have become so prominent and ubiquitous almost. And so I'm glad it's finding an audience, and I'm glad that people are responding to it. And thank you for the feedback. I've heard from some others that those exercises at the end of each chapter are helpful. And it was a way to give people some direction and some like concrete tasks that you could take to help yourself through this journey and come out the other side. So that's my own layoff journey in a nutshell.
Yeah. And I like to call out, right, this isn't a book that's a dissertation. It's not 15 million chapters and it's a tough read. It's light. It's, it's engaging. It's almost like if I got laid off today, I wish I would have had something like this to reflect on real time, because it truly feels like I could have put the book down after chapter 1 and said, that's where I'm at. And we'll get into kind of what those chapters are, but you mirror it with kind of this 7 stages of grief. And so I could have been like, I'm at chapter 1. I'm not past that stage. I'm going to stop here. And then once I feel like things start to feel a little different, or maybe I'm ready to push myself to the next stage, reading that next chapter would have been really helpful. And you did such a great job at breaking it down about kind of the science, the understanding and terminology behind what is this grief stage, connecting it to yourself, but then also just giving kind of world examples and not just saying this is my story, but this is like our story and this is how you can see it. I took a lot of notes when I was reading it because I was like, there was things that I liked and I feel like I couldn't get past like 2 pages without being like, oh, wait, I love this piece. I love this quote. But I did want to read one thing to kind of kick off our conversation around the book and some of the details. And we won't give away all the tea, but the way you started it with chapter 1, page 7, and you talked about the myth of meritocracy, which I've never heard of this before. So I was like, I was definitely reading mediocrity and I was like, he spelled it wrong. But I was like, wait, he's an author. He's published. He didn't spell this wrong. I'm dumb. So, the piece that resonated was that, as you search for answers and settle into the reality and situation, you'll find that layoffs are often indiscriminate and sometimes even discriminatory. Some of the smartest, hardest working, and most talented people may get laid off, while some of the most ineffective, unproductive, and disengaged employees remain. And that for me, it was like, I love this book and I'm not going to put it down. I'm going to read it in one night because that's how I felt. And so many of my peers who got laid off with me were like, I saved the company. I was doing the thing. I was coding. I was the most important person in my group. And the people who stayed behind, some of them did nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, I won't ask you specifically that part, but certain things you included around that. You didn't call anyone out by name, but like, you noticed those trends, and it seems to be something that's similar across all industries and any layoff. Did you get feedback? Did people who knew you in life say, hey, like, are you talking about me in this book?
Nobody has recognized themselves in the book. I sort of gave enough shading so it wasn't exactly somebody's story. But, I think what you call out there is one of the difficult things that people have challenges coming to terms with. And that is layoffs oftentimes are very unfair. You can be a hard worker and a high performer doing the work, even getting the praise. I mean, like I mentioned in the book, I've seen in January somebody who's employee of the year who's held up as the standard for what we should all emulate. And in July, they're getting laid off. How is that? How does that make sense? And the answer is it doesn't make sense, and it never will. And that's a rabbit hole that you can chase until you're blue in the face, and you're just never going to resolve that. And that's where letting go of that and just moving on is really the only way through that. And that's like in my first layoff, I struggled with that for a long time. I was working on the biggest account in the agency, doing really successful work. Client was happy. Everything was going great. Unfortunately, the client hit hard times. The dot-com bubble burst. They lost their budget and I lost my job. And really, there wasn't anything more to it than that. But we struggle to find those answers. We struggle to find like that myth of meritocracy is, that we buy into. If I'm smart enough and I work hard enough, I'll be met with success and reward. And sometimes you find you're on the other side of a layoff, and instead of getting promoted or a raise, you're getting handed a pink slip, and you just can't make sense of that. There are some things about layoffs that can be universal, and that searching for answers and trying to understand the why oftentimes is a dead end.
Yeah. And that's what I liked about these stages as you go through them, is that you kind of help a reader navigate through that, especially with those prompts and those activities that you can kind of do and write down. And even if you don't have the answers, you could always give this book a read and then kind of go back. Now, one thing that I also resonated with and noticed when I first started reading the book was I just came from cybersecurity, and with most tech companies, you're going to go through a software development lifecycle. And a big component of that lifecycle is the discovery phase. And so it's all about, the way one person told me was it's like flipping over rocks and not knowing what you're going to find, only to find more rocks that you have to flip over. And that's what discovery is. And it's very hard to say this is going to take 1 month to go through discovery. So you have this framework of like dismissal to discovery, right? And I'm curious why, in how you were writing this book, why the discovery aspect was so important to include.
Yeah. I wanted to express an idea of hope. I wanted to express that this is a journey. It has a beginning and has an end. And one of the things I say in the book is the person that you are before your layoff, you will be a different person after your layoff. This is a transformative journey. And there are various cues throughout the book around, like the subtitle is Navigating the Stages of Grief After Job Loss. And I'm someone who loves water. I love surfing, and I live in Southern California. And there are various kind of water metaphors and analogies in the book. But ultimately, if we understand the stages of grief to be denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, reconstruction, and renewal, that seventh and final stage of renewal is a stage about discovery, right? It's when the path forward is revealed. It's rediscovering your sense of purpose and direction. The original stages of grief, as they were written by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, I think maybe in the 40s or 50s, she was observing terminally ill patients. And these were stages that they went through as they were passing away and that journey that they were on. She also found that the same stages of grief are what their family and friends went through. And then it was observed that any traumatic event you go through in life, whether it's a divorce, a layoff, certainly, or the death of a loved one, that these are typical stages that people pass through. Later on, 2 additional stages were added to her original 5. And what I like about that framing is the first 4 of these are somewhat difficult and emotionally heavy. If you think about denial, anger, bargaining, and depression, that's where it takes some fortitude to get through. But those last 3 stages are where you turn the corner and you start to see the light at the end of the tunnel: acceptance, reconstruction, and renewal. So to me, discovery was, if this journey begins with your dismissal, it ends with discovery. At the end of that path, you have some level of renewal and a new sense of purpose and direction.
Yeah. And did you feel like, whether it was through writing this book or after every layoff, that you may have suffered, that you went through that you had that kind of discovery and acceptance and renewal after each layoff?
Yeah, I think the tricky thing is how I got there, how quickly I got there. My impetus for the book was my first layoff took me about 18 months to fully, I think, recover and turn the corner. My last layoff took a very, very, very short period of time. And what I wanted to do was save somebody that pain and agony of 18 months in the hope that if they were to read the book, they could narrow that time and sort of like speed to recovery. So I think I navigated those stages. And listen, it's not linear. Although there's 7 and I read them in order as they appear in the book, they don't all necessarily follow each other in that exact order. And they don't happen simultaneously. Sometimes you feel multiple ones on any given day, and on some wonderful days, maybe you don't feel any at all. So it's not as kind of straightforward as it may be understood. So yeah, I think, and for me, I think, at any given period after a layoff, the one that stuck the most, that I had the most trouble with, is probably depression. I write about that. I didn't realize that I had a propensity for depression and anxiety. And that layoff kind of triggered that in me. And that became something that I had to work very hard on every day. And I found that, layoffs would certainly exacerbate that propensity for depression. So a lot of the coping skills that I've worked on and that I write about are great for navigating the stages, and they come in real handy when you're facing depression.
Yeah. And I'm happy that you shared something like that. It's not something I think I've experienced, but I have very close experience with it. My mom does have very like severe depression her whole life. And I've noticed and seen comments from people, whether it's day one or year two of their layoff, talking about this kind of dark shadow and this like swirling and this constant self-doubt that may be depression, or maybe it's just how they're feeling at the very moment. So it was powerful to me that you were vulnerable enough to speak about that. You know, your face is on the back of the book so people can see you and be like, oh, this guy doesn't look like, you're smiling. It doesn't look like someone who's the face of depression, right? I mean, but I don't think people look depressed. They typically don't look depressed. And that's
right.
That's the killer.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that you had mentioned also in the book, it was early on, and it was about the support group that you create this early will essentially become the important new community to replace the ones you've lost, which that to me is something that I have been learning firsthand, is that I had my little core group while I was at work, and I had my personal friends who knew a little bit about my work drama, but those personal friends, they're just being supportive. They're just like, life goes on. How can we help? The work friends I had, the first few days or weeks, really, they reached out, they supported, they liked my comments or my posts on LinkedIn. I haven't heard from really any of them since. And then that new group, the people who I got laid off with, the communities I've joined since, they have really been my rock. And I'm curious, you know, since isolation is really a thing that a lot of people I've spoken with are feeling, what strategies you could recommend to kind of combat that isolation?
Yeah. I think that's a really important thing. And I think isolation is sometimes a byproduct of feeling the shame and embarrassment from the layoff. So you like, maybe you shouldn't talk about this. People may pass judgment on you. And really, opposite that is true. What you should be doing is talking about this with as many people as you can, because one, about 40% of all Americans have been laid off at least once, but nobody really talks about it, right? If you start talking about it with friends, family, colleagues, mentors, you're going to find a lot more people have been laid off than you realize. But understanding and accepting that you were laid off for no fault of your own, that this was the company's way of driving revenue to the bottom line, and it's quicker to reduce headcount than it is to increase sales, starting to chip away at the shame and embarrassment, I think is what's the isolation is emblematic of, right? And what you should be doing is exactly what you said. You find and build a new community to replace the one that you lost. You want to connect, talk, network. I think if you're the sort of person that can and feels validated by journaling, I would recommend doing some journaling, writing things down. Same goes for meditating, or you may call it praying, whatever you call it. Those are all really great coping skills to counteract that maybe instinct to isolate. In reality, you want to do just the opposite. And how you get there is up to you and what feels right for you. I will also say that exercising is a really, really great tool to help balance your brain chemistry in this really difficult time. In exercise, you find a lot of natural brain boosters, like chemical enhancers, serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin. These will help lift your mood, help bounce back from maybe depression. So giving yourself all of these different things, whether it's building the community or just when you're alone in a quiet space, getting in touch with your thoughts, journaling those thoughts will help you feel like maybe you're not directionless or you're not without purpose and meaning.
Yeah. You know, one of the words you used is bounce back, which I liked, and it's used a little bit different because you're talking about bouncing back from depression. I like to talk on this podcast and say that layoffs, they mirror dating lives a lot. You know, you get broken up with, you get divorced, you lose a love, not ideally to death, but just because they're no longer in your life. And that's the easiest way for people, I think, to relate to layoffs if you've never experienced one. And there's no one solution. really there doesn't seem to be a solution at all about losing someone who you've loved because of a breakup. That just makes sense. Some people are like, I wish I had closure. People have gotten closure and still felt like that's not enough. Like I don't know why. And where I'm going with this is, do you think that there's a way in which layoffs one day become a thing that we're just like, we accept it, we know it's going to happen, and it's not going to be such a hard blow? Or do you think that because there's such an identity crisis that goes along with it, and there's such a financial impact that can affect so many individuals, that it will always be something that no matter the solution, we're just going to have to go through a natural healing process?
Yeah, I think layoffs, I'm going to say yes and no. Layoffs will always be difficult because somebody is taking away your livelihood, your paycheck, many times your health insurance. Those are tangible challenges that you will need to overcome, right? And that will be painful. But I think the way people historically have put like their sense of identity into their job and defined their purpose and who they are as a person from what they do, I think that is has already started to diminish and will diminish even further. I think people, and I see this with the younger generations in the workforce, they're working on their own terms. They understand that company loyalty is a bit of a myth, right? They've seen their parents get laid off, and they know that companies don't really show any loyalty when times get tough. They're focused on the bottom line, and um, as a they may not stay in a job for that long of a period of time because they feel like there's another opportunity elsewhere, and they're not worried about like duration or longevity in any one given job. They're more concerned with their own happiness and well-being. So there isn't the kind of reciprocal loyalty that you may have seen in previous generations. Everybody is kind of their own free agent, if you will. Once you start finding your identity and your purpose outside of work and defining yourself not by what you do, but by who you are, you take away some of that can hold. You also see a lot more freelancers, a lot more contract workers. Um, so, and people with side gigs. So you start to chip away at a lot of those things. But I think the main thing that that will is as long as people feel the shame and embarrassment of a layoff, it will sting. The more people realize that there is nothing to be embarrassed about and there's nothing to feel shameful about, then you really start to take away the power of what that can do to you and your emotional psyche.
And before we get to that point, right, because I think that that's a little bit of a cultural shift, which it sounds like we're on the right track of. If someone was laid off today, or you ran into someone and they were like, hey, I'm just feeling this angst around maybe my career and where I was going. I went to bed. I'll share a little bit myself. I went to bed the night before, not making a joke, but just making a statement like, I finally decided in 1 year I would pay everything off, and I had this debt-free plan. It literally was going to take me 12 months, and I had finished the first 3 months. So I was like, I have 9 more months of this. It was very boring. My life was boring every single day. But I had this plan, and I said the night before my layoff, it would be a kicker is if I just got laid off, thinking the company keeps telling us we're safe, thinking that layoffs are not an option. So there was no doubt in my mind that like a layoff was going to happen, especially the next day. And then I got that email. I was like, did I speak this into existence? So for the person who feels like, wow, I was about to get promoted. I wanted to be a VP. I wanted to do this career trajectory. And now they're like, I've been laid off, and it's not a month, and it's not 3 months, it's a year. I can't get back into the game where I was. There's a complete derailing of my career trajectory. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, I would say that a layoff can feel like a permanent derailment, but many times it's just a detour that leads to unexpected opportunities. If you focused first on the emotional recovery and then on intentional next steps, you can rebuild with clarity and confidence and a renewed sense of purpose. Your career isn't over. It's simply entering a new chapter that you get to write. So in the moment, your plans that you had, you feel like they've been hijacked. Maybe they've been put on hold, and maybe the return to the job market, it is taking a while now, but you never know what your own journey may be. But oftentimes, layoff provides an opportunity for a pause to assess your own personal and professional trajectory that you're on. Look, I'm never one to say that layoffs are a blessing in disguise, because they're not. They absolutely suck. And I wouldn't wish a layoff on anyone. Sometimes they can present an opportunity for growth and new direction, opening yourself up to that, and maybe accepting the direction that life is pulling you towards. Maybe the path that you were on wasn't in alignment with your personal values, what brings you joy, what brings you fulfillment, and that reset can be an opportunity to maybe find that alignment. And the financial impact is absolutely difficult and real, but the skills and experience and talents that you have before the layoff, you still have after the layoff. So if you were in cybersecurity, you may have lost that job in cybersecurity, but you're still a talented cybersecurity professional that has valuable skills to offer another employer. And, one of the things that I say is the layoff is something has been taken from you, your job, those things have been taken from you. But what you do next is entirely up to you. And I think that's where an element of hope and some resilience come into play. And then that road to discovery begins.
Yeah. Thank you for that. We aren't talking as much about the next step, right? Like finding the job. I have other episodes dedicated to that part of the conversation. This is largely around dealing with the emotional toll that a layoff can take. What was your favorite part of the book? Or if you're reflecting, going back, if you had to go through a layoff today, is there a part of the book that you're like, this was the most helpful?
Oh, that's a good question. Nobody's asked me that question before. In a way, it sort of changes by the day. It kind of changes by the conversation. I think the conversation that we're having and that comment that I made about nobody can take your skills and talents and experience from you does remind me of one of my favorite stories in the book, which is from the ship of Theseus. This is a old ancient Greek ship that was found, and over the course of its time in history, it was a very notable and noteworthy ship, which had won a bunch of battles and is really famous in Greek history. And it was in a museum, and they found that it had been, all of the wood was rotting and whatnot, and they needed to replace all of the wood at the ship. So they took the ship apart with the old wood and put it back together with the new wood. And the question is sort of a philosophical exercise of, is it still the same ship if all of the wood has been replaced? Does it still hold the same notoriety and place in history? And the answer to that question is, of course, it's still the same ship. It still had those achievements. It still holds the same sort of prestige, regardless of what it's made up of, like its parts, right? And there's an analogy there to are who you are, regardless of the circumstances that you find yourself in, and to not diminish your own self-worth because maybe a job, you may have been laid off. You're still a valuable person with a lot to contribute, and you're not less than.
Yeah, that's all amazing. Feel like that's hard to remember. That's hard to know.
Yeah. I think to summarize, you're not broken. This isn't the end. It's a new beginning. You're not less than. Right?
Yeah. We need that on a t-shirt, Steve. Make it a shirt. Get us some merch. So what have you been doing since your last layoff, since writing this book? What do you do? What's a day in the life of Steve?
Gosh, I'm doing a lot of these podcasts. I'm trying to build my Substack, trying to build my Instagram. Frankly, I'm trying to learn Instagram. I'm a little
Are you on
late to the
TikTok?
party. I'm not on TikTok yet. I'm
Steve, we need
already
you on
late to the
TikTok.
party.
We need you.
I know. I'm so late. Look, I felt like I had Facebook dialed, right?
I'm dead.
But I do know LinkedIn, and I feel somewhat proficient on LinkedIn, and that's a very good platform for this book. So I feel like I've got one social media channel that I'm really proficient on. I'm trying to get better on the others. So if you have any tips, send them my way.
Yeah, so you're on, just so I'm clear, you're on Facebook, which is, I'm assuming, more of your personal life?
Yeah, no, I'm not actually. I'm not really on Facebook with the book.
Okay.
With the book, I've got Instagram and Substack and LinkedIn, and I've got a website. I've got a personal website. So let me, as we're talking about those, let me give those to everybody. It's Steve Jaffe, the Steve Jaffe. I'm like the Ohio State, the Steve Jaffe.com is the website. Steve Jaffe, the Layoff Journey is the Instagram. Steve Jaffe, LinkedIn, and Steve Jaffe at Substack. You can find me there too. So I'm in all the places. Not quite TikTok yet. I've got a big learning curve to overcome on that one.
Yeah. Well, what I'll do is I'll link all of these down in the show notes, and I'll call attention to it in the intro and outro of the episode so that people are aware that they can find your social medias. And when I post about this on LinkedIn, I'll also share that as well, just so people can find you on all of your socials if they want to follow. I think your journey, The Layoff Journey, is a really great book, and I hope that people go and purchase it. With that said, where can you find this book? Is it in all of our Barnes & Noble and Amazon and a local bookstore near you?
Probably the best way to find it is on Amazon. So if you go to Amazon and just, search The Layoff Journey, you'll find it on Amazon. If you are interested in buying it at a brick and mortar bookstore, you can go in and they'll order it for you. There are a few, I live in LA, and there's a few here in LA that have it stocked, but by and large, Amazon is probably the best way to get to it.
Okay. I'll include a link as well in the show notes about, where to find your book, or a link to Amazon. The last question I always ask everyone who joins my podcasts: 1, thanks for joining. 2, are you open to people following you or connecting with you on LinkedIn if this episode resonates with them?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. One of the things I would love to hear is, what is everybody's individual layoff journey look like? If you read the book, what resonated with you? And is there something that maybe you were impacted by that you felt the book missed? I would love to hear from anybody, and I'm happy to help anybody through their own journey. My mission for the book and my ROI for this is just helping as many people as I can. So, please connect. You can connect directly on LinkedIn. On my website, there's also an area to connect with me with my email address. I'll just give it out now too. It's steve@thestevejaffe.com. So, like we were talking about earlier, building and finding a new community after a layoff is really important. And I'm all here for helping to be part of someone's community as they rebuild their journey going forward.
That's my conversation with Steve Jaffe. If this helped you, share it with someone in the thick of the layoff. If you're job searching, don't spin your wheels like I did early on. JobHire.ai gave me the tools to land 5 interviews and 2 offers, and I may or may not have accepted one, but we'll get to that on a future episode. What's even better is their guarantee. If you don't land an interview in 15 days, you get your money back. And right now, throughout the month of September 2025, you can get 30% off with the code DRAY30, DRAY30. Head over to JobHire.ai, plug it in, and start making moves towards your next role. You'll find Steve's book, The Layoff Journey, plus his site, Substack, Instagram, and LinkedIn in the show notes. Quick reminder, Season 1 of the Reboot Era wraps on September 30th, 2025, as I step into my new role as Head of Program Management and Product Operations. I'll be back with Season 2 in January 2026. Bigger stories, sharper tools, same reboot energy. Until then, you're not broken. This isn't the end. It's just a new beginning.